When Love Wavertree did the Car Free Day a few years ago, which was the International Day for Climate Action, I think it was, and International Car Free Day, the High Street really came alive.
What we're hoping to achieve with the Assemblies is that we hear what you want to see develop as policy. So your suggestions are being taken forward to, on the one hand, Love Wavertree, but on the other hand also to Liverpool City Council, and we have direct contacts there. They're really interested, so there's a real wish to engage with local communities in order to find out what we can all do together in a way.
There's a few bits I was going to sort of say about some of the things we're doing with regard to transport, obviously at a city region level, but very much focusing on the impact it can have here in Wavertree, in the kind of local community. But whilst there's a few things I'll sort of tell you where we're up to. One of the most important parts of my role actually is listening, and actually listening to different views and perspectives as to what is good, but all too often what needs to improve and what needs to be addressed. So I think there's a couple of bits that I was going to sort of mention that we're doing at a city region level that could have huge impacts for all parts of the region, but particularly here in Wavertree. One is to do with buses at the end of the day, because as developed as our local rail network is compared to most other English cities, still over 80% of public transport journeys that are made in our region are made on the bus. And actually, when you drill into that, one of the large reasons for that is about 40% of the citizens of Liverpool don't have access to a private car. So the bus really is the way for people to get around. I think one of the things that we very, very, very much recognise though is the bus network can be good in places, but all too often isn't good enough by a long straw, and I'm being very, very diplomatic. Most of you may be aware, but Margaret Thatcher deregulated all buses outside of London in 1986. And ever since that time, basically bus companies, so in our case locally Arriva and Stagecoach, basically can run whatever services they want. And that's one of the reasons why the services don't properly integrate with the local rail network, why there's lots of different fares and ticketing regimes that are higher than they should be, because it's run on commercial lines rather than on a network-wide basis. And there's lots of ways I could tell you about how deregulation doesn't work, but I'd rather focus on where we're going rather than focusing on why it kind of hasn't been good for over 30 years. Because of devolution and the sort of devolved deal that we got as a city region back in 2016 now, one of the powers as a city region we got back is the powers we lost in 1986 over buses. Some of you may have seen on the news a couple of months ago that we've been able to announce that we will be introducing a franchised bus network. Now, what that basically means is it's the way the system works in London, where the mayor sets the timetables, the routes and the fare structure, and bus companies then have to bid for the contracts to run those services to the specification of that kind of network. It ends deregulation and bus companies can't just do their own thing. So that's something that we are in the process of doing. Because it's very laborious legislation, it will take a few years to roll out. So please don't kind of expect this to be happening in 6 months' time. It will probably take about 3 or 4 years to do in totality across the region. What do we want to do under a re-regulated scenario? Well, we certainly want to have one network in place with one fare structure, so it makes it much easier for people to use, and set those fares as low as financially sustainably possible, so cheaper than they are today. And crucially, link in with the local rail network in a way that, frankly, it doesn't at this moment in time, and the ferries when you get near to the river as well. I think some of the other bits that we're focusing on, though, is very much a completely zero-emission fleet of buses by a point in the 2030s. We haven't specified an exact year, but Steve is very keen on it being in the early 2030s, not the late 2030s. One of the things that we're doing to sort of start that kind of process is we have put down an order for our first fleet of hydrogen buses that we're going to operate on the number 10 route, so Liverpool to St Helens. Appreciate it doesn't quite come through Wavertree at this moment in time. They will be publicly owned, partly because it's more financially viable for us to own them rather than go through a privatised model. So some of the things you'll see on the new hydrogen buses are the double-deck vehicles, but big skylights on the top deck, so it's much more light and bright and airy. High back leather seats, wood effect flooring, 2 wheelchair spaces. The first bus in the country to have 2 wheelchair spaces, because we know a lot of disabled passengers want to travel together, not separately. So really trying to kind of set a very high standard, because I'm glad you like it, because we want to actually attract as many people onto buses rather than it being seen all too often as a last resort. As well as a much better quality of vehicle, we know we've got to give buses priority on the road network. So we do crudely want to bring the bus lanes back, and we'll do that, but we want to do it to a much higher specification. So we've got a programme called Green Routes, which is about high quality bus priority infrastructure, but also how we work in active travel modes, so segregated cycle lanes and better pedestrian facilities. Again, in line with that proof of concept, we're going to roll that out on the number 10 route first, but the 79C route, so through Wavertree all the way out to Runcorn, is one of the top 5 routes. We want to roll that kind of green routes principle out. I'm sure what we're planning on doing can meld very nicely for some of the things that you're going to hear about shortly. So if you like, that's the kind of vision for buses. The other bit I was going to touch on was active travel. Because whilst my role is at a city region level, so I don't control the highway network, that still sits at the council level, we do have a role in coordinating active travel across the region, because it doesn't make any sense when you get to the boundary with Sefton or Knowsley or St Helens or wherever you're going, if there's a completely different approach. You've got to have something that runs seamlessly. Steve has got a vision of 600 kilometres of high quality cycling infrastructure across the region, and we are starting to roll that out in different places. Locally to here, we are in the process of giving Liverpool City Council the funding to design what they call the university route, which is basically the route from the university up through Edge Hill, through the Mystery, and along Walton Road towards Childwall. It's already a cycling route, but actually we know we can really improve the quality of that as a segregated route. And look, I'll be very honest, I use that quite regularly to go in and out of the city centre. So we know there's a lot more that we can do. There's also other areas where we'd be really keen to work with you on different kind of models we're starting to develop. So you're probably aware that Simon O'Brien is our walking and cycling champion. Simon's brilliant because he's been passionately involved in this agenda for about 4 decades now, and he really is a critical friend, and I mean that in all those kind of levels. He will not shy away from saying when it's bad, frankly, and that's really important, because we don't want patsies and yes people. We actually want to sort of deliver things. For people that do actively travel, it's great because you find your own journeys and you work that out yourself. And there's some really good maps, and you can look at that and you can work out your journeys. But let's be honest, most people don't want to have to kind of plan ahead. They want to be able to get on their bike, give it a go, and end up where they want to go in a safe and kind of comfortable and enjoyable manner, not end up on Childwall 5 ways thinking, oh Jesus, I'm taking my life in my hands here. So we are going through the process of actually kind of looking at our wayfinding, so it's much more foolproof, frankly. You can get on your bike and make your end-to-end journey without you ending up somewhere that you feel unconfident about because you've only just got on your bike. So that's another kind of element that we're doing as well. One of the things that is a genuine invite on active travel as well is we do have an active travel forum. So if Love Wavertree would like to get involved in that, you are very, very welcome, and I can put you in touch with that process. It's a forum that meets virtually about every 3 months. But we found actually by having virtual meetings, ironically we get a lot more people engaged from right across the region, rather than trying to drag people to a meeting at Man Island on a kind of wet Thursday evening, if you like. So those are some of the bits I wanted to kind of talk about in terms of what it can mean locally here. But as I said before, the most important part of my role is not pontificating to you about we're doing this, we're doing that. It's actually to listen to what you think's good, but crucially, where we need to go further and what else we need to do. So
I was just going to ask you talked about the Green Routes principles. What are those principles?
Okay, well, everything is on Mersey Travel's website, but obviously the principles behind it, bluntly, are bus priority. How do we speed up buses and also kind of support active travel as part of that, because it's a huge opportunity to do that. And if we're speeding up buses, that means reallocating road space, and inevitably it will also mean that kind of cars slow down a bit, but we have to give public transport the kind of natural advantage, not car transport. I think we're very conscious of, if you look at when the bus lanes were taken out almost a decade ago, ironically there's a couple of routes which sped up, believe it or not. But the two routes which slowed down the most, one was the number 10, the other is the 79, because it gets trapped in the high street bluntly. And if you're making an end-to-end journey from Belvale, for example, into the city centre, you end up spending 10 more minutes here than you should be doing. And you know, the principle of any kind of transport network is people want to get from A to B as seamlessly, as simply and as quickly as possible. They don't want to be sat in traffic, be it in a car or particularly on a bus. They want to be getting from end to end. So that's the basic principle behind it, but also high quality of design. So it's something that actually kind of supports what we're trying to do with the environment in all those communities that those services run through.
And just one of the things which increases the benefits of is the work that was done on Princes Park Boulevard, the STEPS programme, the cycle route there. So when you were talking about cycling before, is that the type of approach that you would hope to take elsewhere within the city region? We're looking at existing cycling routes and how they could be better serviced for people?
Yeah, one of the things that Simon is particularly focusing on is what he calls the missing links approach, because we have got some good places where there's good quality infrastructure, but all too often it kind of reaches a sort of a metaphorical dead end because it's a bit of a difficult junction, so cyclists get off your bike and push across and then you can get on again. So Simon's really looking across the whole region how we can fix some of those broken links, and if there's any locally you're aware of, let us know, because we can certainly put those into the mix. I think I'm going to say something nice about the government, and I very, very rarely ever do that. In fairness to the government, they launched a document called LTN 120 last year. I won't bore you with it too much, but that's the guidance of specification for any new cycling and active travel infrastructure. It's actually one of the best bits of government guidance I've ever read, because it's very, very sort of focused on properly segregated, high-quality infrastructure, not just white lines painted on roads that, frankly, lots of motorists don't kind of respect. So that is helpful, and actually we have to design stuff to those standards, otherwise we don't get the opportunity to bid into national funding pots for that. One of the other things that we are looking at, and it's a little bit further away from here, but not a million miles away, is around low traffic neighbourhoods, because we think there's huge opportunity around all of those. We partnered up with an organisation called the Freshfield Foundation that you might not have heard of. It's basically the charitable dowry of what was once Littlewoods, based in Freshfield up in Sefton. They've been able to fund the city region to do 6 low traffic neighbourhoods, so one in each of the districts. The Liverpool one is going to be around Lodge Lane and in that area of Toxteth, because there's a really strong local group that's been calling for it. And we really hope a lot of those kind of lessons about implementing a low traffic neighbourhood, working with all the relevant community groups, can then be sort of rolled out across the whole of the city and the region.
Can I just ask, what exactly did you mean by low traffic neighbourhood?
What it basically means is, first of all, stopping rat running. So you block off a number of different kind of entrance and exits into an area. You tend to only kind of have one entrance in and out of an area. That does 2 things. It particularly sort of stops through journeys that shouldn't be going through a residential area. But secondarily, it tends to make it more difficult for someone to get in their car to drive round to where they were going rather than walk, bluntly. So, there's actually quite a lot of, you wouldn't call them low traffic neighbourhoods at this moment in time, but there's actually quite a lot of streets in Liverpool where over the years we've blocked things off because we don't want rat running traffic and a lot of speeding cars down terrace streets, for example. So there's already a lot of areas that you could argue already are low traffic neighbourhoods, but it's how you take that to a kind of higher level, because London is different here, don't get me wrong, but there's certain parts of London where they've done it exceptionally well, and it does kind of make an area just more livable. And I look at it particularly from the perspective of, if it means that your kids can play in the street, then why wouldn't you want to do it at the end of the day? And if it might mean that you've got to walk 10 minutes to the shop rather than get in your car because it'll now take you 13 minutes because you've got to go around the houses, isn't that a positive step in the right direction? And if you do it with the community, then you step through those kind of issues well.
Around schools and things like that.
Well, some of the things that the City Council's doing is what's called school streets, where you do physically shut the road at the start of the day and at the end of the day. So, because, look, we all see it when we're going around the city and beyond, where a small minority of parents would drive into the classroom if you let them. And you have to deal with that because it's bloody dangerous at the end of the day, particularly with primary school age kids. And one of the benefits of being in a city, most primary school age kids are usually within about a mile of where they go to school. So for most of them, they should be able to ideally walk to school. During COVID and coming out at the end of the lockdown, we did a lot of detailed work on when schools were resuming, how we'd manage social distancing on the bus network and things like that. And we were actually quite pleasantly surprised that about 44% of kids are actually walking to school already. So we don't start from a bad place here, but how do we get it much higher into the majority, basically? And one of the ways to do that is to stop cars being able to get all the way to the school gates at the end of the day.
Can I just ask, you said that one of the major priorities was speeding up buses. From my point of view, that isn't a problem. The problem is bus services are poor, especially in the evening.
Yeah.
But often they go to a 1 hour, one bus an hour, which just isn't good enough. So, I think I can accept, admittedly I don't work in town, I work locally, so I don't have that rush hour problem.
Yeah.
But it tends to be there's a lack of bus services. There's a
Yeah.
lack of the timetables are very poor.
And I'm not going to defend the current situation. There are some routes that are very good. There's all too often large parts of our region where the coverage is crap, frankly. One of the reasons why bus deregulation doesn't work is the vast majority of bus services are done on a profitable basis. So you get lots of services in your peak hours in the middle of the day, very little first thing in the morning, late at night, and Sunday it really drops down in a way that Sunday's actually the second busiest shopping day of the week. Lots of people are out and about. One of the things that makes it difficult is, since the buses were deregulated in the mid-80s, one of the few responsibilities of local authorities is to subsidise the stuff that's not profitable. Well, when austerity's particularly hit, there isn't the money to subsidise all those services that will never make money, but shouldn't have to, because it's about a network principle. One of the differences of how we'll do that London-style regulated franchise model is we'll basically take profit from the 79 in the peak hours and spread that out, in those kind of early mornings and late at night. The vision is, and it gets a bit granular route by route, is to have on every route at least one bus an hour from 5 o'clock in the morning till midnight, because we're particularly conscious about shift workers who can't make the end-to-end journey. We also have identified about 15 routes where you'd probably try to do it 24 hours, but being very honest with you, at 4 o'clock in the morning, that is only going to be one bus during that hour because the demand isn't there. But at least it means people can get around in a way that, look, if you want to get from A to B, going out your house at 7 o'clock in the morning and getting back by 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, you can broadly do that. But if you're trying to get for an early shift, that means you leave home at 5 in the morning or you're getting back 11:30 at night, it's really difficult at the end of the day. And all too often, people either have to get a car, or if they can't afford that, spending large amounts of money on taxi fares, or all too often think, I'm not going to go for that job opportunity. And that holds people back, doesn't it? So, yeah.
I attended the Assembly on transport, so I mainly talked about buses and cycling and so forth. I think I'm going to take away a lot of ideas about cycling and transport, which I didn't know. You think you know a lot, and then you learn an awful lot more, don't you? So I've learned a lot of things about plans and systems which you think will work and why they don't work. For instance, electric cars. It's not the silver bullet. It's not great. So I've learned about that. We've discussed cycling, motorists. Sharing the space together, it's called, that equity between drivers and cyclists and walkers. I've learnt a lot about, certainly the council was interesting because he had an awful lot of information, which I didn't know about the trains. I heard about the new trains coming, but didn't know how had more cycle space, and they're going to be brilliant, and so it'd be interesting to see the trains. It's where we live, and it's a shame that, you know, places like Wavertree, which is such a historic place, it has gone down so much, and it should be a place which we celebrate and enjoy, and for the environment, not going so far to get to a nice restaurant or a nice cafe or to do a bit of shopping. It's very poor on shopping here, so it'd be lovely to have a vibrant high street again.
We're both friends, and it came about by just having like a loose conversation about just the high streets. So it was just really to see what could be done a little bit different than it is at the moment to try and promote the local area, merely as a conversation starter and like a voluntary thing. Really, it's just we're local residents and we wanted to see what we could do, and it kind of developed from there as an initial couple of designs and through to a report there that we've got.
When Love Wavertree did the Car Free Day a few years ago, which was the International Day for Climate Action, I think it was, and International Car Free Day, the high street really came alive. And it was when I was standing there and we realised that they'd actually played a cricket match in the middle of the high street because it was wide enough that you could play that and you could have people walking down either side. And we started looking at the spaces of the high street and thinking that, well, what is Wavertree High Street at the moment? Well, at the moment it is, and to use a phrase that I've heard other people use, but it's not my phrase, a traffic sewer. And it was like, well, surely we can reclaim some of this tarmac and repurpose it and use it for other things. The other side of it is that as a high street, and as many high streets across the country, they've changed. They're no longer the shopping destinations that they were. They're no longer the places where people go. You see boarded up, you see closed shops, you see a proliferation of poor uses in them, really, and they're not vibrant anymore. They are no longer the heart of the communities that they once were. So how can we combine all these things? And the idea basically is to reimagine the high street and re-love it again. And key to that is adopting a new way of thinking about it. And so the report essentially is based on a lot of the research that Love Wavertree carried out. The biggest things that people complained about were easing traffic congestion, greening the area, and better and more appropriate parking. They were the three big ones. The next one after that was preserving the old buildings on the high street. So how can we address those top three aims from the public consultation? This was 370 local people who answered this questionnaire, and that was what they came about. Wavertree, very busy area. There's lots of schools in the area, which should, as you say, be lots of active transport. People should be able to walk to these schools. A very densely built up area with lots of tight terrace streets. Huge sports facility right on our doorstep. You know, we've got the swimming pool, we've got the athletics track, we've got the tennis centre, massive park to play in. It's a really well-connected place. It should be really, really vibrant, and yet it's not doing what it should be. The guiding principles of our document, basically, I won't go through them all, but the key ones to break down is Wavertree High Street must be a place for people to live, work and shop. It must work for every type of person, including current and potential future users. It must accommodate public transport users. No people or groups of people should be privileged at the expense of others. However, we recognise that some people are more vulnerable and some people more able, and we must respect that. It needs to be a diverse and inclusive place, and it's rich in built and natural assets, and we must use them for the benefit of everyone and the enjoyment and all. And one of our guiding principles of this is that we didn't want to try and do something absolutely radical and new and experimental and tested out. Craig and myself looked at what has been done elsewhere in the country and applied at different places, and we've brought those principles over to
just bring the best bits, really.
Bring the best bits. So we've cherry-picked things from a place like Poulton in Cheshire, which Craig can explain a bit more, or some of the new stuff in Birkenhead at the moment. So none of these things are new or radical. They're already built elsewhere in the country. We're just applying them to the high street. But the proposals sort of break down into identifying 4 key areas along the high street that we think are important to deal with. The first one is the Wellington Road Junction, down by the Wellington pub, which is an absolute terrifying experience to try and cross there as a pedestrian. Creating a high street for all, which is reducing the car speeds that travel up and down the road, the dominance of them, adding dedicated parking spaces to stop the antisocial pavement parking that goes on. Tied into that is the third one, which is pedestrian safety. And the idea is that we want to create clearways up and down the high street, which are essentially 2 metres or so, 1.5 to 2 metres of pathway, which you don't find lampposts or A-boards or bins or things in it. They have them in many places, and the footways continue over the side roads. And the final one, awakening the village heart, which is probably the most radical part of it, but that focuses up at the clock tower and that area around there, which is criminally underused in our opinion and needs more activation.
This is Rathbone Road. We've got Picton Road, Wellington Road, Picton Road running through there. So one of the key issues at the moment is there's absolutely no provision for anybody to cross the road at all. You're taking your life literally in your hands sometimes to try and cross between the cars changing over. Over here there's the sports aquatic centre up here, sports facility. But then over down this way we've got the train station. So there's a lot of people that will come down and then want to cross as well diagonally. So we just thought, well, can we not introduce a diagonal crossing?
It does seem a bit daft to us that the train station and the most direct route from the train station to the sports centre and the park is right across this junction, and yet there's no way to walk directly across the junction. If you want to get there, you have to detour 150 yards down the road to use the pedestrian crossing outside the library and then sort of make your way back across. That isn't encouraging active travel, because that's actually making the journey more frustrating and more annoying for the pedestrian, and especially, like I say, if you've got dogs, kids, a wheelchair user, reduced mobility or whatever, it's frustrating and would actually take a lot longer to walk that journey, press the button, wait for 30, 40 seconds for the lights to change. And there are some situations where we do have to say pedestrians stop and wait, but we shouldn't be adverse from saying to motorists, you stop and wait as well. So, yeah, that's the first one. As Craig said, it's been done before. They have X crossings in town, Victoria Street in town.
It's quite busy.
Busy city centre junction, and they have introduced these X crossings. So it has been done in Liverpool itself. The second one, creating the high street for all. This is essentially about reclaiming that redundant lane, and where we can reclaim that redundant lane, basically reduce the entire carriageway to 2 lanes. There's enough space for lay-bys for buses to pull in and pull out if they need to, but sometimes there isn't space for a lay-by. Craig will probably explain what this road layout means and how it works, because this is actually really clever, and this is what they've done in a place in Cheshire called Poynton, sorry.
So what is essentially done is the road carriageway is narrowed a little bit. So it's to try and make you, say if you're a driver of a vehicle, it's to make you more aware that you're in an area that isn't necessarily just for you. It's to make the road feel almost like you're driving through a city, like a city centre, or almost feel, am I on a pedestrian? Is this road pedestrianised a little bit? So what that does is it then makes the vehicle drivers slow down, because they're trying to be more aware of the area that they're in. And in what we've done here, similar to in Poynton, is added in lots of crossings all the way up the road. Some are still the signalised crossings. We didn't want to take those out because there may be people with
Additional needs.
Yeah, additional needs that will need to, like partially sighted people will need to be able to cross when it's like signalised. Then also at the same time to add in additional informal crossings up the road, so that it's to the driver, it's like, oh, there's going to be somebody else crossing there, there's somebody else crossing there. So it just makes it feel a little bit like more difficult to drive fast. And we'll come to some of the corners that we've made a little bit tighter. But also as well, it's adding in, which Richard's mentioned, this continuous clearway, which is a shared space. There might be then space for the shops to be able to put things outside, or tables and chairs, pubs and restaurants. So it makes it a nicer experience, so that you want to walk, you want to go outside.
A lot of the things we've tried to incorporate in here are just about those subtle hints that you all take in every day, but you don't realise your brain does that. Oh yeah, I am in a slightly different area here than I am, and I will modify my behaviour accordingly.
It's almost like the road stops, the domain of the car stops there, then that's the pavement is across, which is the priority of the pedestrians and cyclists using that, and then the road starts again, so cars crossing that, it kind of takes them out that zone.
And it fits very well with the national government guidance on the user hierarchy of roads, where pedestrians and those are at the top. And the final one, awakening the village heart, is probably the biggest and most radical one.
So why not? Let's just see if we
so
can
why not do it?
just do it and see what comes from of it. So.
And it's essentially, sitting up there is Picton Clock Tower on a roundabout with a really nice 1920s Art Deco bus shelter and public toilet. But you can never get there because it's trapped in an island of whirling traffic. It's a wasted opportunity and a wasted space. We've got a village green there, one of the last bits of village green in the city. We've got a play park there. Is there a way to bring it all together to create an actual village heart? One of the key things we realised is that road layout up by the Picton Clock and the old cinema there, it's entirely based upon the 1900s tram system that we had in Liverpool until the 1950s. And the curve of the road and the sweeping curves and everything are exactly that, because that was where the trams used to turn around to head back into town. They'd get as far as there. So it needed big, long, sweeping curves because trams can't turn corners very well. But that has just carried through and nobody's changed that road layout. And it does mean, and I've seen it done, cars can come out of Church Road onto the roundabout at 40 plus miles an hour, and you don't have to take your foot off the accelerator and you can go straight down the road. The idea of this is it forces you to, it pinches it in, so you actually go, hang on, no, I am, again, entering a different area. I can't just keep my foot on the accelerator and take a lovely wide turn of a corner.
I think part of the session is to think about really what are the things that are issues for us and what are the things that we'd like to change. And based on the discussion, which I think was really interesting before, I've made a couple of notes, but I just wondered whether we could maybe pick that up as part of the things you're talking about the sort of wider vision for the area and what people think, how we could feed into the strategy. Do you think it would be useful?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
We have the issues with traffic management, antisocial car parking as well. The cars as well for short journeys, traffic like layout and design, street design, behavioural change, and then we've had a couple of really good solutions on bike storage. Some of the school and cycle trails I thought was really interesting. I've taken your suggestion, Sean, of the cafe, pubs, shops, cycle friendly. And also as well the equity between motorists and pedestrians.
I think I was getting sad because that clock is like beautiful. It's got like a poem on it, and like it's really lovely. Which is like really sad. Like it should be such a lovely part of the high street, but
and the reason you can't get to it is the traffic. Well, it's not so much the traffic because you can. It's the carriageway is so wide, you don't feel safe getting towards it because it takes you twice as long to cross as we think it should, really. And again, it comes back to that idea that this is a busy route. We know it is a busy route. It gets lots of traffic through it. One thing Craig didn't mention about, we looked at it, is in order to accommodate the second roundabout, which is the bit where there's now a junction on Lance Lane, we'd have to take away a bit of the green space because we can't get a turn in otherwise. But that's made up for by the added green space that we can get out of it. And this is one thing we've tried to be practical in this. And it may look quite radical, and I bet that if we showed this to some highway engineers, the hair would probably fall out. But we have tried to be practical, and Craig's been very good with his numbers and his figures, and he's worked out exactly, he's looked at the national guidance of design and roads and things and worked out what the widths are.
One of the things as well I think that was interesting was about the reuse of street space and road space. And I hadn't realised, now you've mentioned it, I can actually envisage the tram in the circles because it'd be the same issue as Penny Lane, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know how you would change design. Is it like in an area like this, which is very traditional housing stock? but the way to do it so it's fit for purpose.
It'd take bravery, to be honest. I think that's the. I mean, I think it's entirely physically possible. It just takes a bit of bravery and somebody to say, actually, it's been this way since 1900 or whenever it was, and nobody's bothered to actually change it. In fact, this is one of the things that I've noticed from looking at the high street, is that we have there's zombie infrastructure along the high street. There's previous schemes and things that have been done cheaply and have died, and they're just left there. So nobody has looked at this high street in a holistic way for probably over 100 years. I feel fairly confident in saying that. Everything has been done by increments here and there and the other, and that's why we end up with 7 different types of bollards. That's why we end up with 14 different types of paving surface, which are, you know, uneven and cracked up. It is years, literally decades of adding things, taking stuff away, and it's left us with an incoherent mess that doesn't feel particularly friendly, doesn't feel particularly safe. And although probably not the main reason why High Streets has died, has contributed to it. It's the subtle things that you notice. When people don't care about somewhere, when the people who are meant to care don't care about it, why should we care?
I've come here today to see what's happening in the local area. I was asked to come and do a presentation on travel in the high street, and having done some work, just thought it was an opportunity to come and show what's been done and see if we can get some feedback and see where that goes, really.
I'm a local resident of Wavertree. I feel really passionate about the area, and I'm interested in how we can alter our lives, change our behaviours, and how we can make a more sustainable sort of future for everybody, for not just ourselves but the environment, the planet. Want to do good, basically.
I'd probably take away the fact that it's been interesting in meeting different people today and finding out about different schemes, especially the cycling scheme. And I really like the idea of the cycle shop where you can take your bike into. I think that's really good, because I think if you are going to be using active travel and cycling, there's always that risk that your bike's going to get pinched. So if you've got somewhere to take it and leave it and then forget about it till you need it later, I think that's absolutely brilliant.
I think one of my big takeaways is that there's a lot of passion out there to make these changes, and lots of people seem to have the right idea, and I think we all need to fight slightly harder for it, because there are going to be naysayers, and there are going to be people who don't see the climate crisis as a major issue for them. But I think the main thing is that we're not alone in thinking that this is an issue that needs to be solved and dealt with, and can't just be kicked down the can for future generations. We need to take control of it now, and we need to start making those changes ourselves.